Hi everyone, this is Colin Sharp, creator of the Seventh Valkyrie. I wanted to pop in to give a little bit of a trigger warning here. This episode contains subject matter that may be triggering or traumatizing to some listeners. And if you're concerned that this might apply to you, I'm not going to go into too much detail so I don't spoil anything, but if you're concerned that might apply to you or you're uncertain about how you're going to get through the contents of this episode, please feel free to reach out to us on our Patreon, on our Instagram at the Seventh Valkyrie. That's the THE seventh spelled out like a word, Valkyrie at gmail.com. And we'll give you some support, whether that's if you'd like to know kind of the spark notes or anyway, this is a particularly intense episode, and I just wanted to give you guys fair warning. Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Meridia discovers the blood-soaked snow of a massacre already infested with scavengers and carrion birds. The last words of a sole survivor give her clues as to the cause, and she sets out to track it down next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Nimrasa, the Night Hunter. That was why there had been no attacks beyond the eastern wall. Meridia set off through the woods again at double time, using the ascending sun to mark her course north until she collided with the stream, which was now half frozen. Turning back east, she began to cover the miles towards their meeting spot, no longer worried about concealing her approach. If the wolf had patrolled the entire woods the way he did that first encampment, there was a good chance the only things left in the forest were Meridia and the animals. As she closed in on the clearing, part of Meridia still doubted that he would be there. But then she smelled the signs of him, long before she actually arrived. The winter breeze had shifted, which was not abnormal, but with it came the sweet and savory scent of meat cooking on an open flame. Meridia slowed again. None of this seemed like the obsessively secretive man she had never been able to catch off guard. And as she drew closer, there was a rustling, and the wolf's two hounds leapt out of the woods in front of her. Meridia stopped completely, watching the two hounds carefully. When she took a step forward, both of them barked, but when she paused, they had split reactions. The slightly larger of the two, a male, was growling at her, but the other, a female, whined at Meridia. Meridia took a step back, and both barked again. "Hey, dogs, what the fuck do you want me to do?" The female put her ears back and whined again, while the male growled again. And then the two turned to each other, growling and snapping, and then the two of them looked at Meridia and disappeared back into the forest, far too fast to follow. "What the fuck was that?" Meridia breathed to herself. When she continued up the river, she was quiet, still half expecting Val to come gliding out of the forest, gloating like a huge smug ghost. But as she snuck up to the edge of the sheltered clearing where the stream ended in a tiny pond, she spotted the billowing smoke, smelled the scent of cooking meat, and eventually spotted Val, sitting in front of a roaring fire, with his helm and upper armor on the ground beside him. He was covered in soot and blood, his hair matted with sweat as he devoured hastily torn strips of sizzling meat off of an enormous spit. Past him, another spit crackled, dripping hissing fat into the fire, ready to be eaten when this one was done. Off to his side, Meridia could see the remnants of the deer the meat had come from, a fresh kill that had been sloppily field-dressed and tossed to the side of the clearing. "Hey, Val, you know you could have come back to the city," Meridia said, stepping into the clearing. "They would have treated you like a god after what you did. Hell, they treated me like a god, and I was just kind of close to... you?" Meridia stopped about 3 steps into the clearing. At her arrival, both of the hounds had raced up to her, the male growling, the female whining, but at a whistle, they both looked uneasily back at their master, falling silent with their ears back and tails between their legs. Val had turned to Meridia, but said nothing, just staring as he paused, halfway through tearing into the spit of meat. "You can calm down, Val. I made sure I wasn't followed." Well, not like there's anyone left in the city or the woods capable of following us. Still, you might want to finish that meal off sooner rather than later. I could smell it from a ways away when the wind blew in the right direction. He kept staring at her. He raised the spit back to his mouth and devoured 3 more huge, dripping, juicy bites of the meat before putting the spit down and standing, cocking his head sideways at Meridia. Standing at his full height, in the armor of the Iron Wolf from the waist down, and with the memories of him in battle still fresh, she was inspired to speak. All right, I'll admit it. I thought you were good when I saw you back on the wharf. But when you faced the Black Blade, the way you moved, that was the first time I recognized you. Really recognized you from all those years ago. It was so clear. His blank expression did not change. He just finished chewing his meat, swallowed, and then walked towards her, discarding the half-eaten spit to the ground. The hounds remained where they stood, their tails still between their legs, looking up at Meridia, incomprehensible. It's just... Meridia was still looking for the words as he got closer, dwindling the distance between them until he stood above her, with his full height again, towering even over Meridia's 6-foot-plus frame. Hey, personal space, Val, Meridia said, taking a step back. He closed the distance again, looking down at her, and as she raised her eyes up to meet his, he stepped into a beam of light and Meridia gasped. His eyes were streaked blood red, his pupils dilated so far they were like black holes in his ragged expression. Fucking hell, Val, how high are you? You've got the worst junkie's eyes I've ever... But then she was silenced as Val moved with the same speed he had moved onto the battlefield. Only, rather than attacking, this time he pinned her to the tree behind her, kissing her hard and hungrily, tongue pressing into her mouth, devouring her lips with the same vigor as he'd attacked the meat on the spit. Meridia's eyes went closed, then wide open as he kissed her, and in another instant she shoved him back. Wait, Val. She was panting heavily. The exhaustion was catching up to her, making her loopy, and her head was spinning with 1,000 different feelings. Just give me a second. Her eyes caught his. They were hungry, starving. He kissed her again, pressing her hard against the tree and pulling her into him, squeezing her close and continuing his offensive on her lips, eventually backing off only to attack her cheeks and her neck. It had been a long time since anyone had shown that much desire to Meridia. Perhaps since the war, perhaps never. But even still, Meridia shoved him back to arm's length. It was harder this time, and even as she extended her arms, he was still pushing, still licking his lips, his eyes ferociously hungry. Well, can we just talk about this for a second? Meridia glanced over to the hounds, who had stepped back, tails between their legs, behind the dead deer. On a second look at the animal corpse, Meridia's breath caught. She hadn't looked closely at it, but the deer hadn't been shot with a bow or caught by the hounds. Its neck had been snapped and nearly torn off. Val? As she looked back into his eyes, the hunger there had only grown. She didn't finish whatever her next thought was, because then her ears were ringing from a ferocious, casual backhand across her face, and then he had her pinned by her neck to the stump of the tree, his other hand pawing across her shoulders, down to her hips, reaching beneath her cloak. Hey, yo, what the fuck, Val? Meridia spat in his eyes and twisted, wrenching herself partially free and hitting him with a palm strike in the stomach. But he barely grunted, and instead of collapsing, he dragged Meridia down to the forest floor with him. Then he seemed to be coming from everywhere, grabbing at her breasts, grinding against him, growling at her when she threw her head back and tried to headbutt him, partially trying to pin her while groping and squeezing and probing. Val, get a fucking hold of yourself! Meridia shoved his chest again, but then another slap came out of nowhere, sending her ears ringing, and then his arms clamped down on her like iron, and she was wrenched over onto her stomach, where he lay on top of her, panting and breathing. You motherfucker! Get the fuck off of me! Get off! She inchwormed her body and slid under him, pulling him along with her as he refused to let go. Then he pulled her again, off of her feet, shoved her down onto the ground, and when she next opened her mouth to scream in his face, she found her own hunting knife at her throat, and Val's unforgiving black eyes locked on hers. His face was twisted in an expression of hunger and rage, and for the first time Meridia shrank back, feeling the knife draw blood as it slid across her skin. There was nothing of the Val she recognized in those eyes. The knife slid down from her neck, cutting a bloody line across her skin until it rested in the center of her chest, her shirt half torn apart, and Val's hungry gaze waiting just behind it. Meridia breathed and shuddered, eyes on the carcass of the deer in the clearing. She had no idea what he was capable of now. Wolf, deliver me, Meridia whispered, though the Iron Wolf was snarling above her, preparing to feast. Please. Please. Why are you doing this, Val? As her cry rang out through the forest, she waited for his clawing hands to keep tearing and taking and violating until he was satisfied. But in the silence, the wandering hands had stopped. All she could hear was the wind through the trees and the crackling of the fire. Then, Val's breath caught above her, and when Meridia opened her eyes, she saw the faintest rings of color creeping in on the edge of Val's eyes. He sat back, still on top of her, but his breathing now ragged, uncertain. His head began to shake erratically. Val? There was no response. His breath started coming out ragged, in little gasps and catches, and she could see him frantically looking around the clearing, eyes glazing over as he found his dogs, closed his eyes, opened them, found them. Meridia tried again. Val, everything's okay? It absolutely wasn't, but this direction was better than the one that they'd been going before. Suddenly, Val began to shake, and blinked about 100 times in a minute, and yet still he knelt above Meridia, until at last he glanced back down to her, meeting her gaze. His eyes were still bloodshot, but his pupils had returned to at least close to a human size, and he was shuddering, struggling to focus. Then he registered Meridia. Pinned beneath him, her shirt half torn, a line of blood down her neck, and the bleeding knife still in his hands. He screamed out in anguish and scrambled off of her so quickly he stepped right on Meridia's stomach, knocking the wind out of her as he scuttled on all fours to the trunks of the trees, sitting up, shaking and pressed it up like he was trying to shove himself through the wood. Val howled, lifting his head to the sky, eyes closed and running with tears, and then he began to thrash, stabbing the ground around him, kicking out and digging deep trenches with his feet, pushing against the roots of the tree and renewing his screams anytime he caught a glimpse of Meridia. Meridia carefully rose to her feet as he howled, checking her cloak and shirt, her eyes on the hounds, who had raced to Meridia's side but went no closer to Val. Both were whining at her now, terrified expressions as they looked helplessly on at their struggling master. Val shouted, the loudest and most human sound yet, a cry that sent birds flying into the air and lasted until long after he no longer had the air to keep going. Instead, he choked and convulsed like he was still trying to scream, but all that came was saliva and gasps, and then with his eyes directly on Meridia, he lifted the shaking knife to his neck and slashed his own throat. Hey there! If you're hearing this, it means you're listening to the public version of this episode. I appreciate you taking the time and your interest in the series. It really helps the algorithm, it helps us grow. But if you are enjoying the show, maybe take a look over at our Patreon. We have uncut versions of the early episodes, access to new chapters before they're released for the general public, and you can shape the future of the series by deciding on new merch drops, bonus content, and more. You can get started for free at patreon.com/seventhvalkyrie. That's patreon.com/7thvalkyrie. Hope to see you there.